On behalf of TechPACT, I welcome you to this webinar, which is part of the TechPACT Equity for All research series. TechPACT envisions a world where anyone with a passion for technology has the opportunity to succeed. Founded by a group of impassioned technology leaders, we are committed to raising diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging across the technology community. Hi, I'm Edward Wilson Smythe. My pronouns are they and them, and I'm the head of research at TechPACT. This webinar is based on an upcoming TechPACT white paper titled Impact Beyond the Diversity Headlines, which identifies 4 key drivers of inequity in technology workplaces and industry as a whole: biased recruiting, unfair opportunities and recognition, exclusionary norms and rituals, and psychologically unsafe workplaces. The white paper also presents 12 tangible and immediate steps that technology leaders can take to drive meaningful change in the workplaces and across the technology community. Today, we're privileged to have 2 leaders join us to discuss the topic of creating inclusive cultures, Linda Pack and Rehan Qureshi. Before we begin, let's have our guests tell you a bit more about themselves in their own words. Linda, Rehan, thank you. Please introduce yourselves to the audience.
Thank you, Edward. I'll go first, Rehan, if you're okay. Thank you for having me today. And my name is Linda Pack. I am Senior Vice President in Information Technology for all of our global brands and corporate functions at Estee Lauder Companies. And I am going on 6 years at Estee Lauder. And when the topic of this discussion was presented to me, I was super interested specifically around exclusionary norms and rituals inhibiting inclusion, because it is something that I guess throughout my career has been something that I've had to manage and balance. And the fact that I'm using the words that I have to manage and balance is not necessarily inclusive. And so I am passionate about creating and perpetuating an inclusive environment in the workplace for all of my colleagues, my teammates, and everyone else with whom I engage. So I'm really thrilled to be here today.
Thanks, Linda and Ed. My name is Rehan Qureshi. I'm based in Toronto, Canada, and I've been working in the IT industry for close to 25 years now. I've lived in Canada for the past 30 plus years. I was born in Kenya in East Africa, and I've had the privilege to manage and lead global teams over the last 10 years or so. And as part of my role, like Linda said, we come across so many different cultures, and working in a North American culture becomes a very sort of homogeneous approach that we are expected to sort of treat all our employees with. And not just by personal experience, but also by what I see many of my colleagues across the world who have to sort of go through. I am very passionate about this topic. And the positive thing is I see a sea of change. Webinars like this, white papers that have been published like this are really awakening, I think, a sense of purpose and a sense of change that I'm really, really proud to be part of, and looking forward to talking more about it today.
Thank you, Linda and Rehan. Welcome. As we jump into this discussion, we've read the white paper, and I think we've all had experience related to cultures that seem exclusionary or wrong norms that we don't quite fit in. Could you give us some examples from your personal experience as you have grown through the industry, or experience with others that you're aware of, so the audience can get a feeling that it impacts everybody, including leaders such as you? So either one of you want to take that, that'd be great.
So I think the white paper did a really great job about giving examples, right? Because examples really ground us into making it very personal. And there's 3 things that I've had personal experience on that I'd like to share, how they used to be in the past, and where I see some of the future leading, and where there's definitely areas that we're seeing growth in organizations and people in. And the first one is around exclusionary norm around how we socialize. We socialize after business and after work. And as someone who doesn't drink alcohol, I've found that a lot of corporate conversations and career progression conversations as part of a social group happen in bars or after work at after events at conferences or training. And I used to exclude myself purposely from those, and I found that over the years, more and more of my sort of relationships were not being sort of fully capitalized, because I wasn't a part of this in crowd that was able to socialize, especially with very definitive focus on binge drinking or bar hopping, et cetera, right? So that was a personal experience with me, and I still find like I'm excluded from that, and other people in my group, in sort of my culture or who have those type of beliefs are also excluded from that. The second one I found personally impacting, and I also see many of my other colleagues impacted by this, that the white paper talks about, is really this challenge where people struggle with pronouncing foreign names, right? It's become a point where I was on a call in a professional setting, and one of my own colleagues really embarrassed me by saying, I'm not even going to try to pronounce your name. So I'm just going to introduce you to the customer. And the customer was on the call as well. I mean, this was hugely embarrassing. And I actually ended up having an HR conversation about it as well. My take on this is, if you can learn how to pronounce mojito and guacamole, you can learn how to pronounce Rehan Qureshi, okay? And for too many years, when people said, well, I'm just going to pronounce your name how I feel, many people in my culture or in different cultures are acceptable with that. They'll accept the mispronunciation of their name. And I think the time has come where that should just not be acceptable anymore. What I do now is I will stop the person, I'll spend another 2 minutes with them if they learn how to pronounce my name. No, that's not how you pronounce it. This is how you should try to pronounce it. And that is a respect of your culture. It's a respect of your person. It's a respect of your entire being that we need to train people on. And then finally, I think the last one I'm going to talk about is, how we're, I think, and the positive one here is, as we think about, the different types of cultures and, LGBTQ, for example, workers who were not very much protected in our workplace before, we're seeing a very, I think, positive awareness of how we can recognize all those people as part of our business and as part of our cultures and as part of our processes. So I see some improvement there, lots of work to do. But I'll stop there for a minute and would love to hear Linda's thoughts as well.
Thank you, Rehan. Everything you said really resonated with me. And the two examples that I wanted to add are this. One is, I remember when I was expecting with twin babies, and I felt like I needed to hide the fact that I was expecting. And so I needed to behave a little differently. If my colleagues were going out drinking, I would still go with them, but it wasn't my authentic self to join them in that type of setting. I think sometimes women feel like they have to hide the fact that they are expecting because there may be a judgment as to, oh no, are they not going to be as productive during the time that they're with us because they're going to go on maternity leave or paternity leave for that matter. And I think we all, those of us who have children, celebrate it, and I believe that that's something to be celebrated and not to be hidden as, this is my authentic self. I am expecting, and I am thrilled to have this opportunity to be, expecting a family, etc. On the flip side, though, individuals who don't have children, who are in settings where there are events or conversations around children, having children, the fact that we celebrate Mother's Day, and it's Mother's Day in the workplace, et cetera. I think the messages that are delivered have to change a little bit to say, if your authentic self is you make a choice that you're not going to have children, that is amazing. If you decide you want to have children, it's amazing. It is not anything to hide. Same with your spouse or your partner. So many times I've heard people just talk about my partner, and I love that I'm starting to see colleagues say my wife, my husband, who is in a same-sex relationship, which I think is really beautiful right now. The other example that I would bring up is it's a little similar to what you were talking about in terms of a social setting or meeting settings. Someone very close to me who has and continues to observe Ramadan, and I have many friends who observe Ramadan, being asked to attend a meeting that is a lunch meeting, or understand that it is something that is very personal to you. But I think that we could make accommodations for a different time where it doesn't have to be lunch. You could have a 2 to 4 meeting if you planned well, as opposed to having a lunch meeting when you have an individual who has to sit there watching everyone, and it feels like there's a feeling of maybe some discomfort because maybe they're not eating with you, or you feel like I have to suppress my authentic self because of this personal belief that I have. And so I've observed those, of course, directly, and as you said, Rehan, we are starting to see more openness. I think it starts with a mindset for openness and acceptance. It's not about specific plans that you have to craft in a corporate setting, and you have to sometimes teach the mindset. But I think as I start to see more and more individuals embrace that mindset, it is encouraging for me.
Thank you, Linda and Rehan. And Rehan, I distinctly remember that naming issue. And I also remember when we escalated that, the answer from our quote unquote leader, and I'll put that under quotes every day, was, well, if everyone was sensitive about the way the name was pronounced, why don't I start calling you Murugan from now on? Let's just do that. And let's see how you feel after 20 times I call you by a perfectly legitimate name, but that's not your own. The sense I got out of that interaction is that it's a vicious cycle. On one hand, people are made to feel excluded and, like you said, awkward because people are not eating or not drinking alcohol, or no one needs to explain what's wrong with them because they don't drink alcohol. It's a choice for some people. It's a religious observation for other people, and it should be whatever it is. But then I've also seen when we point that out, the onus falls on us to do the education, and we get called out as making the workplace uncomfortable. So it wasn't uncomfortable for you, and this is a real life example, to take me and 2 female colleagues to a strip club because you were a steel plant executive in the good old days. But when I pointed it out, I was causing the problem because I was making you feel uncomfortable about what you did in the first place. So I think there's also that element of the narrative of accountability. We are not accountable for what we look like, what our name is, who we worship, how we eat, how we dress. Leaders are accountable for ensuring that everybody has an equal or close to equal acceptance. And if we can wish people Merry Christmas, we can wish people Ramadan Kareem. We can also, given that this is Navratri, the week, the last week of September, the first week of October, we can wish people Shubh Navratri. And you can notice I pronounced Shubh Navratri well. I didn't butcher it because I respect that culture and I respect all cultures. So it should be easy for people to do that as opposed to singling people out for whatever reason. Now, building on that,
the point I'll add to that, I think expanding on that, I think Linda hit a really good point that that really resonated with me too, which is around, I think, leading by being your authentic self, right? And we have to set the tone and set the example that others will follow. And Linda, the example you gave around having a lunch meeting at Ramadan, there was a time in my career that I actually fell for that trap, and I was the victim of that, and I wasn't able to speak out, and I just accepted that as that's normal and acceptable. And guess what? The audience or the group members around, because they weren't called or made accountable, they just went ahead with that, right? But if you're able to call it out, it does, like Ed said, put people uncomfortable. It does make them rethink. Some people will kind of make that leap, other people may not. But it's a constant journey. You have to keep doing it. And then you have to lead others to do it. I'll give another example. So in Canada, one of the very famous ways to exclude somebody and to purposely sort of exclude them is to ask them, where are you from? Right? And this is a very famous Canadian question, right? When somebody of an Anglo-Saxon background will ask somebody, where are you from? By default, that sort of person doesn't look like them, starts getting into a long-winded history of, well, I wasn't born in Canada, I came here and this and that. And you know what, I fell into that trap in my first few years in this country. What I do now is I actually turn the question around and ask, where are you from? And that puts them really in an introspective position, right? So I think we have, as leaders and as role models, the ability to sort of set the bar and to teach others as we go along. And I've actually coached people who are around me when someone asks, where are you from? Don't get into that defensive position to explain that your ancestors were just one generation away, or you are a first generation immigrant, when the person asking that question is a third generation immigrant. But guess what? They were not indigenous to this country, right? So I think calling people out, making them accountable is a never ending battle.
Yes. I want to expand on that point about others feeling uncomfortable that you call something out. And, I fell in the trap to use, I love the term that you're using. I fell for the trap of feeling like, oh my goodness, I made them feel uncomfortable. But now the way I see it more, whether personally or in the workplace, is that it is I'm going to use the term fragility of the other person, as opposed to me having to absorb all of that. And I'm happy to educate you as long as you have the open mindset, as long as you don't have this fragile mindset that, oh my goodness, you're calling something out, so you're all of a sudden making me feel uncomfortable. I no longer feel bad, and I make sure that colleagues and teammates no longer feel bad about bringing that diverse voice to the table, right? And I think that is something that all leaders have to encourage and support going forward, so that it isn't like, oh, this person called something out. All right, let's kind of brush that under the rug, but actually openly talk about it and say, hey, why was that uncomfortable? And did this person really need to feel uncomfortable by sharing a very different perspective and work towards embracing the differences, right? Embracing the diversity, thereby promoting inclusivity.
Yeah, and I love what the white paper that TechPACT wrote around, I think the steps on how we can lead going forward, right? I love this concept of encouraging storytelling, right? Sometimes, Linda, to build on your point, right? It's just an education, and ignorance is bliss in many cases, and people haven't been either exposed or they just haven't opened up their minds. So when we encourage that storytelling to give the background behind, the reason somebody doesn't do something, or here's the reason I react to this, or here's why this is important to me, I think it just promotes us making that workplace more inclusive, right? As opposed to us making another silo, or being exclusive, or us trying to be exclusive, as you said yourself. And then I think, once again, the designing by purpose. I love that, right? I think we now, where we've gone to a point in our leadership careers, we have all the ability to kind of set the tone, right? Just like Ed said, I mean, one of the things I learned from Ed in my career was it's incumbent on us not just to celebrate our own cultures, but to celebrate others, right? And to be leaders and to show that. So I think that kind of sets the tone of us designing that by purpose as well.
And then Linda, Rehan, I would add some of the observations related to norms at the workplace. So one of the to the point about educating people about the correct pronunciation names, or why Ramadan is important, or why Diwali is not just a throwaway line, because at a White House event, as it so often happens, one of the pushbacks I've seen is, we need you to focus on work, and I'm going, well, yes, but you didn't hire a robot. At some point we'll be replaced by robots, but you hired a human being. So if people can talk about the Seattle Seahawks game last night, we should be able to talk about a Liverpool soccer match or football match, even call it football for goodness sakes, and could really confuse people. I think it's a question of what is accepted in a workplace as normal routines and what's valued. I remember when Rehan and I were working, more than 10 years ago at a client, and there was the 2011 Cricket World Cup. I just plugged in my laptop and projected the final on a large screen at the client's conference room. And clients were very confused about why people are watching cricket, and that was a great opportunity to engage a client that, yes, there are sports other than American football, baseball, basketball, and hockey, especially in Canada. And I think it's more a question of setting examples on storytelling, as you mentioned, Rehan. It is acceptable to tell stories about Islamic history and Islamic culture. It's acceptable to tell stories about children from same-sex parents. It's okay to tell stories about being a vegetarian. It's okay to tell stories about the meaning of a name that is uncommon. Because guess what? Other people tell stories all the time, because we tell stories about football. Is Tom Brady still in a relationship with Gisele Bündchen? I mean, I don't make that person feel weird by saying, sorry, there's no place for that, focus on work. So I think it's a question of rebalancing to say that all stories are valid, not just certain stories from certain cultures.
Yeah, no, I agree with you about what those workplace norms are, right? And even things like, as Rehan was saying, going out for a meal where there is alcohol, or going out for a meal where you can still do those things for the purpose of socializing and getting to know your teammates better. It doesn't necessarily have to be in those specific settings, right? So, for example, you love football. I don't know very much about it, but I love music, and maybe some colleagues and I will go listen to jazz or some performance and have a meal or something beforehand, or some other event. And I think that the more you open up that aperture in terms of what are very normal things that you could do in a social setting with your colleagues, I think that also increases your chances for being more inclusive, right? So I think that's going to be really important going forward. If when you wanted to get to know, for example, back in my consulting days, when you wanted to get to know a senior partner, you went out and played golf with a group of people, and I don't play golf. And so it was one of those events where, I could go, but since I don't play and I'm not good, and you're talking about competitive individuals, you're kind of going to feel like, oh, she's the handicap. And so you kind of feel the burden of not being seen in the most positive light. And that is a situation when you want to be seen as a potential leader by someone, right? Or the next project or the next opportunity that you may have. And so I think we need to rethink and shift. Again, I keep talking about mindsets, shift the mindset and then follow through with the execution as to expanding what those normal behaviors are.
Yeah, I think you've made a great point there, Linda. And I think there's two aspects of it as far as I'm concerned, right? There's the minority or majority of people who are just used to doing things like they always did, right? Like, the partners that go out and play golf and, they'll invite somebody that might not work, right? And I think the alternative on the other side of the coin is where we as leaders, like we've been talking about, have the ability to kind of change that, right? And lead by example. So it's amazing what you learn when you ask people, right? To your point, Linda, rather than the golf partner saying, come along to golf. If you ask your audience around you or your team or your peers or your customer, what is it that you'd like to do? And you're going to hear 3 different opinions, 2 of which you've never even thought about, as opposed to just assuming that, booking a dinner or a lunch or a round of golf is just the obvious thing that they wanted. So just being, I think, as the culture of inclusion, one of the most important things is just ask and never assume. And then becomes the leadership challenge of, okay, how do I balance these priorities, right? How do I make sure that it's inclusive? And maybe there's not always a right answer, but you have to have at least shown that you've made the effort rather than assuming.
Yeah. And there's deeper engagement when you ask. There's deeper engagement that you can actually achieve, right? Because if it's an event that even if you decide you're going to suggest something, but there is a vote, right? You were involved in this way of an inclusive way of trying to get to what did most people want, and then you feel like, you know what, I feel more connected to this event, and so I am going to have a great time because I was part of the decision making. Not that everyone needs to be part of every decision making, but we're talking about these sometimes rare opportunities when you can get out of the office and see the light of day sometimes and spend quality time with your colleagues, to be able to get the most out of those types of scenarios. I think is it's a gift, right? And to be able to see it that way, so that and everyone who brings that vibe, as my Gen Zers call it, if you bring that vibe into the room, or if you bring that, feeling into the room that I don't really want to be here, this wasn't really something I wanted to do, but I kind of have to be here. Yeah. It impacts the, I like to say it impacts sort of the molecules in the room, and basically, maybe maybe it's not as optimal as it could be, as if everyone was just so excited to be there. I think it's a different dynamic.
For sure. And that's a reflection on the leader, right? When even one person or 2 people feel excluded, you're right, the vibe is off. Maybe some people may not see it, but the ones they do will question. Obviously, the individuals that are feeling it themselves, they're obviously excluded, and they're there because they had to be, or they chose to go even though they didn't feel like they had a choice. But other people will sense it too, and that becomes a reflection on the organizer or the leader. We have the opportunity to sort of set the context and change that.
Yeah. Well, one thing I wanted to maybe call out, because it's it's become more top of mind for me lately is that we have a North America hub, and we're really trying to make sure that as we have meetings, that it is also where there's the feeling of inclusivity by the members who are not necessarily physically in the room, that we're not just talking about things that are very relevant to the US, or we phrase things a certain way that we would if, even in your regional geography, maybe New Yorkers say something one way versus another way. And we're really trying to be more versatile in the way we communicate, right? Because we don't want to come across as, XYZ centric, right? Even if, we're talking about music, if I'm talking about alternative 80s music, that is going to exclude some individuals who may not necessarily have grown up with that, or and just being sensitive to the fact that you can say, I love this music, and it's part of your storytelling, and back to the storytelling about yourself, but to continue to say, hey, what about this band or that band and this band and this band, and it goes on for a while, you start to lose the other people around you because they can't really relate to the conversation. And that connection among people, especially we're coming back to offices and reconnecting with colleagues, that the last thing that I'd want to do is to make anyone feel like they're disconnected in any way.
So Linda, Rehan, on these points, may I ask, and we're probably 10 minutes away from the end of the webinar. So one of the common refrains I've heard from people consistently is that, two refrains. One, stop being so sensitive, and two, this is not important. Work is important, and sales targets are important, and revenue is important, and but not having the right meal to eat for one meal is not important, or names being mispronounced are not important, or not being able to bring your same-sex partner to events is not important. Could you give us some perspectives from your perspective on what impacts these have on either you or others in similar situations, on why this is as important as all the other things that we talk about at work?
I think it's hugely important, right? I mean, I don't think you can minimize how important it is. And I think there's a very short-sightedness on leaders that still think that way. And unfortunately, Ed, to your point, it's not a minority. Although I can say there is light in the end of the tunnel, we are seeing, different generations of leaders coming in and setting the standards. But the impact, to answer your question very specifically, the impact is not just on the individual, the impact is on the organizational culture. Where you have a culture that is non-inclusive, a culture that is deliberately, not understanding people's perspectives, that is not a culture that is welcoming, and that is not a long-term successful culture. And people will choose and will vote with their feet. That, I think, culture will also impact how that company does business, how they treat their customers. So that's something that permeates all across, right? You can't minimize that it's not important. It is important, and it is a big deal, and that's the only way to think about it. And pragmatic, and I think intelligent leaders get that. And I think that's the only way to think in the future.
I agree. I work for a company who believes that our people are our most important, I hate even using the word assets, but are the most important part of what makes up our culture, right? And your culture is, it's I guess it's bi-directional. Your culture equals your values equals your culture. And I absolutely agree that especially in this day and age, when we do have to think about the business aspects of, there is a there's so much competition on talent, right? And one of the things that you want to lead with is around what an amazing culture you have, and to be, to have a leader who basically makes all of those things very trivial, or doesn't allow your partner to join an event, or doesn't make the effort to get to know your name or to pronounce your name properly, I think is breaking that connection between culture and values and culture, right? And so I think those things absolutely matter. And it isn't trivial. Every little thing is, especially as leaders, we want to role model. We want to walk the talk, right? We have to role model all of that. But the only way to role model it is to believe it, right? And to live it and be it for yourself. And I think as you continue to influence those around you as well, and educate and support and so on, I think that I'm hoping that what you had asked, Edward, becomes no longer something that people talk about, like, oh, why are you being so sensitive? It just is what you do, right?
Yeah.
You don't judge it one way or the other. You just are thinking about the other individual, right? Again, going back to my statement that your people are your most valuable assets. I mean, robots can do some jobs, but it's just not going to be the same workplace. It's just not going to be the same culture, thereby different values.
Thanks, both of you. We're approaching the end, so I'll ask you one last question, and take your time to answer that. So as leaders, what advice would you have for other leaders that are trying to make this change? So like there are a few leaders who get it, and there's others who may need more education, and there's others who will never change. But talking about that big middle group who want to do the right thing, what advice would you give for those leaders to, what steps can they take to drive a truly inclusive workplace where everyone feels included?
I don't believe there's a formula, right? I believe the first step is, if you make a commitment that you will have a growth mindset and know that you will fumble and open to others sharing their story or sharing with you, I'm not okay with it, or I really appreciated what you did for me, and to continue to learn, and as well as I said earlier, that becomes part of your DNA, or you just naturally walk the talk. I think it's a growth trajectory, and I for one am not perfect at it. I'm still learning, and I've been learning for a very long time, and I will continue learning, because our values and our cultures and what it means to be inclusive is going to continue to evolve. And I think the first step is committing and embracing the great growth mindset first and foremost. And then, once you've accepted that, or you've embraced it and you're personifying it, that you can let the others happen. Right. And then you can start to plan out, well, these are the things, these are my intentions, and this is what I'd like to do. This is what I'd like to achieve with my teams, and as well as, of course, in your personal lives, to be able to really role model that.
Rehan, your thoughts on this?
I couldn't have said any better than Linda. I think I'm going to kind of try to paraphrase a few things you said, because I really believe in them. I think the first one is, Linda, like you said, you have to believe in this, right? And believing in it means being authentic. Okay, and because people will sense inauthenticity, or if you're being disingenuous, right? That's number one. Number two is, we've talked a lot here about leading by example. I think that's super critical. You can't say one thing and do another. You can't expect a model behavior, but they don't always follow through. You have to be consistent, and you have to just be diligent. And then thirdly, I love what Linda said about, look, we're not perfect as leaders. We're always learning. So, having that open mindset to grow and to learn, because it's a journey, right? Even today, what's acceptable might change 5 years from now, 10 years from now, right? Given that we've come such a long way in 20 years or 30 years that I've been working. So being open, always growing, a leader's work is never done.
On that note, thank you so much. This has been an incredibly informative webinar, and thank you for sharing those personal stories. I know some of those are tough, and the intent is not to re-traumatize anybody or re-traumatize anybody hearing. I'm so glad that you shared those stories to help inform challenges that even leaders face all the time, even we all face today. So with that note, thank you so much. And that brings us to the conclusion of this webinar. For people listening at home, please download the white paper from the TechPACT website. The white paper is right there, Impact Beyond the Diversity Headlines. You can also go to Amazon.com and buy the ebook. All proceeds do go to TechPACT, so we encourage you to do that. And finally, please go to www.techpact.org and sign up and take the TechPACT pledge, so that you too are also part of the journey we're all taking together to creating a more inclusive and diverse workplace where everybody can succeed. Thank you so much, and see you at the next webinar. Bye.